We met already yesterday. I am not a carrot specialist, but I am working on the quality of food plants in general, with some emphasis on vegetables and genetic resources evaluation as well. And this work fits within this frame of my activity. So you see the title, Sensorial Evaluation of Carrot Germplasm. And this is the topic of this presentation. Indeed, we will explain the subtitle a little bit later in this presentation. Indeed, carrot is perhaps, after tomato, the vegetal crop to which more frequently sensory evaluation have been applied for quality evaluation. You see, it's quite a long time, over 40 years, that sensory studies are applied to carrot. So what is new? There were pioneer studies for the main respects of sensory evaluation, so texture and flavor. The group of Simon was pioneering this, and then they did some of the very early contribution to these topics. And why was sensory evaluation applied to carrot? For several aspects you see here. The basic studies relating chemical composition to sensory notes, the definition of vocabulary for sensory evaluation, then typical agronomic problems, cultivar differentiation, or the effect of environmental and growing condition, and especially post-harvest and storage and processing. Why especially? Because, of course, when you go to a supply chain, the processor and consumers are closer in the chain, and so they communicate more easily, and so that's the reason why sensory evaluation is more often applied to processing or storage studies than to breeding, even if we have heard yesterday that also breeders are now much more than they were until 10 years ago to quality, evaluation of quality traits in carrots. Then going to germplasm evaluation, here I reported a paper that doesn't deal with the sensory evaluation, but the chemical analytical evaluation of germplasm. They were very clever, much more than we did, because we still have to publish our data in the same on the same topics. So quite a range of application, and in the streams also this contribution is placed. Perhaps you can imagine, if you don't know directly, that applying sensory evaluation to germplasm collection is not that easy, not because of methodological problem, but because the amount of material to be evaluated sometimes is quite huge, and it doesn't come together. Sometimes some accession is very not homogeneous, so very difficult to evaluate with sensory evaluation. The amounts available are little, and so this poses some problems. And we have to take into account, as you will see in my contribution. But at the time we did, there were claims that consumers could be interested in peculiar types with characters different from the ordinary carrots to which they were more acquainted to. And so that was a question. We had this diverse germplasm available during our evaluation, so why not use this germplasm to verify the hypothesis that quality of carrot can be evaluated and perceived by consumers, and in which way? Through sensory evaluation. Here is our material, 20 accession. You see quite a variation in shape, a little bit less for color, certainly less than the variation we have seen in our meals, during our meals. For example, we don't have really purple types, but we have yellow types, pink types with the core yellow, orange type rather yellowish inside, and the shape was quite variable. Why these 20 out of over 130 were chosen? Some of them some of these 130 were excluded simply because we didn't have enough material available, or we didn't intend to repeat the evaluation of this. And the other, some were simply commercial varieties that we wanted to include as controls, and the other were chosen by some kind of previous information we had on their composition of essential oil, carotenoids, other components, or simply because of their shape that was somewhat different from the usual conic shape to which the Italian consumer are acquainted. Here's some information about the trials. Going to sensory evaluation, 69 assessors evaluated the external characters and internal characters, but this only on 16 out of 20 accessions, because for 4 of them at the end we didn't have enough material for evaluation. And the overall acceptance was evaluated both for visual and for the internal characters, and then for visual character, the visual character were assessed were external color, internal color, shape, and here the acceptance was rated. For the internal characters, hardness, crispness, fibrousness, sweetness, and aroma. Here the intensity, so the perception of the character was rated. This is a scheme that was adopted also in other contributions, so we thought that it was consistent with our goals. And then the data were analyzed in order to compare the samples, then find out which are the determinants of overall acceptance, and then to analyze the structure of the sensory perceptions. Here simply you have the accession ranked in order of external acceptance, the first orange column. And you see that for these are external characters. You see that at the first position you find some long and conic root, and this was quite interesting because the carrot consumed by Italian is not conic, but it is cylindrical. So it's this type that has over 90% of the share of the market in Italy. We also found in the first position this type that is quite unusual, but when you go in the last position, then you find here a type that for shape is very similar to this one, but you see, and indeed the shape was positively evaluated here, but the color, especially the internal color, was not well evaluated. Consumers are not acquainted, were at this time not acquainted to this, not very attracted by this yellow color, and this is the same for this type. And you see that this short and flat types were not very well rated for overall external acceptance. Here we go to the internal characters. Here are not so much pictures because pictures do not represent, of course, the internal characters, but you see that the first place we have varieties, and we have commercial varieties in many of the first position. So the internal characters, for internal characters, commercial varieties were, as an average, better evaluated than the strange germplasm types. Most of this type lacked sweetness, and we are going to see how sweetness is an important character for carrot. Here you have the relations of external acceptance to its determinants, so shapes, external color, internal color. Here the correlation coefficient, and here is a path analysis showing the direct effect. These red figures are the so-called path coefficient, the standardized multiple regression coefficients, and it is very simple. The correlation of each of these 3 characters to external overall acceptance was mainly caused by a direct effect, so there is not so much to comment further. The situation is a little bit different for the internal characters, since the overall acceptance was the main determinant was sweetness. And you see that sweetness acted almost exclusively by a direct effect. When you go to aroma, it may look a little bit strange for what we have heard yesterday, this positive correlation coefficient, but in this set of a session, we didn't have harsh types. So aroma, the perception of aroma had a positive impact on internal acceptance, but you see that the direct effect is very, very small. The perception of sweetness enhances the perception of aroma. So sweetness is also important as an indirect determinant of acceptance. And similar situation going to physical characters, you see with crispness and hardness. Hardness was little important for its direct effect, but its positive correlation was due to a relation to crispness, to crispness. So indirect effect through its relation to crispness. And you see that both of these characters enhanced the perception of sweetness as well. The structure of perceptions, principal component analysis, including all the variables I mentioned. You see the first principal components explaining about 1/3 of variance is related to external characters, to shapes, external color, internal color, and acceptance. The second one, 20%, related to aroma and sweetness and overall sensory acceptance. And the third one, about 17%, related to the physical characters of perceptions. What does it mean? If you locate the acception in different quadrants, you can classify this acception, the acceptions for their acceptance on the basis of these characters. And indeed, this is what you find in these pictures. You see, here are, in the first row, you have the samples that felt in the quadrant 1. So the one with positive external character acceptance and positive gustative aroma and sweetness acceptance, and so on for the other quadrants. And you see some of this long and conical shaped carrot beside Amsterdam also here. But Amsterdam, you see that is in quadrant 4 for in relation with PC3. So the texture of Amsterdam in this case, it may look quite strange, was not so much appreciated. And this is more normal for this big carrot that the texture was not very much appreciated. So we attained a classification of types, and you see again that unconventional types definitely were not at the top position also in this case. So general conclusion is that this sample of Italian consumers were rather conservatives. We may have been enthusiastic of this nice germplasm and the perspective of exploring something positive and something new, but with the limit of this data, okay, we cannot be so sure that the Italian consumer will accept something very different from the ordinary cylindrical carrots, at least for a mass production. Maybe that for niche markets there will be some possibilities, but not for a bigger market. And that's all. Thank you.
Morgane Robert from Premial. I was wondering about bitterness. You haven't talked about bitterness?
Yes. If you have seen this evaluation were not done by a trained panel, but by a panel representing more consumers. And so we could not introduce characters that were not very evident in this germplasm. Really, there was no bitterness. You have seen also for aroma. We introduced aroma because in the previous, in the preliminary assessment of the perception, okay, aroma was perceived, but not bitterness. So we didn't include the characters that then could have a random type of evaluation.